Welcome back to Resistance Rangers on the Air. We talk a lot on this show about the National Park Service, but the culture of silencing and the disposability of federal workers is not just contained within the green and gray borders of the Park Service. It is a systemic issue that spans the entire landscape of public service. In early 2025, the Department of Government Efficiency, also known as DOGE, and the Trump administration initiated a shock and awe campaign against the federal workforce. Thousands of probationary employees were handed termination notices that ignored actual performance, it bypassed due process, and as the courts are now confirming, violated federal law. We were told our performance was poor, despite many of us having no record of negative evaluations. In fact, we weren't just let go, we were purged in a wave of manufactured urgency that treated dedicated public servants as administrative clutter. It is vital to remember that being a probationary employee, it didn't mean we were bad at our jobs. We were on probation simply because every new federal employee must serve a mandatory 1 to 2 year probationary period. DOGE and the Trump administration didn't find inefficiency. They attempted to find a loophole to bypass civil service protections. I'm your host, Maya Sora, a fellow fired Probie, and on today's episode, I am joined by 4 incredible people who refuse to let these removals happen in the dark. They represent a collective of terminated probationary employees, or probies as you'll hear me call them, from various agencies who came together to build something the government likely doesn't want, something they have named the Probie Survey. This survey is a living record of our termination experiences, the devastating impact on our careers and job prospects a year later, and the psychological toll of being targeted by your own government. Welcome to the show, Greenbrier, Momo, Krista, and Anna. Thank you all for coming on the show today. I think one of the first things I want to discuss with each of you before we dive into the survey data is I would like to give each of you a chance to tell us who you are, the agency you served with, if you're comfortable sharing that, and then walk us through your own termination experience, because I know that each of us all had different experiences based on our agencies, and even within our agencies, completely different experiences. Just kind of tell me about what that moment was like and how did it give you the fire to turn your pain from your experience into this survey?
So I'm going by Momo on this podcast. I was at one of the NIH institutes. I was a program officer and I had just started this job. I want to say January 13th was my start date. And so I was only on the job for about 4 weeks when all of this went down. My dream job, I've always wanted to be a program officer. It was a windy road to get back to NIH because I had been there prior and I was loving it, but it was a very stressful time because I started and then the inauguration was a week later. And I think that week, I remember reading on Reddit that they were putting together a list of all the probationary employees across the federal government. And it was very nerve-wracking. But it was also frustrating because within NIH, everybody was telling me to not worry, that NIH has always been protected. NIH is bipartisanly supported. We're going to be fine. We're going to be fine. Up until the day before when I was reading on Reddit that, the firings were coming, the termination letters were coming. Still, people that morning were telling me that it was going to be fine. And so then that day, February 13th, I had just talked to my branch chief, and then a couple hours later, she gives me a ping and hop on a call with her, and she's in tears, which, is nice that they were emotional, or, that they didn't want this, obviously, and basically told me that I was on the list and I would be getting an email. that day. I did not get an email that day. I got an email, I think, on the following day, Saturday, when I was out with my friends. And then I actually ended up opening the email on Sunday because I was told that once you open the email, you would lose access to everything. And so I wanted to make sure that I was ready. That happened. We were told that we were going to be placed on administrative leave until March. But then because of a court order, that was extended. And then something happened that on May 8th, they were allowed to fire all of us, at least all from NIH. And so I received my termination letter in the mail with like a termination date, I think of May 8th, if that's correct. Lost that, and then was just kind of job hunting, couldn't find anything. About a month later, my branch chief called me and was like, hey, we actually need help. We can't hire you back, but would you be willing to come back as a contractor? So now, after the long government shutdown and all the delays that took, I started a contracting position in the late fall. So I've been supporting one of their programs. It isn't bad because I get to stay remote and all that stuff, but it's still not my job, and I'm still not using the skill set that I built as a PhD scientist, as somebody who has worked to get to that position and wanted to kind of like encourage and make room for the next generation of scientists in this field. And right now I can't do that in this position. So would I go back eventually? Maybe, but it depends on a lot of the things, which we'll get to when we talk about the rest of the survey.
I guess I could go next if that's okay, because I have a little bit of a similar timeline to Momo. I was also at NIH, so I got kind of the same emails and letters. Before I had started as a employee, I worked as a contractor at NIH for about 8 years, doing communications and data analysis and working primarily on projects that dealt with diversity and equity in science training. So then I moved over to a different institute where I was working as a program analyst, and I started in, I want to say May 2025. So I had been at NIH for a long time. And even though I was a Probie, I still had almost a decade of experience working at NIH. I really liked working there because I feel like it was a way to like do something that was both interesting, like made me think. And I feel like I always had projects to work on and problems to solve. And it also felt like you were like doing something really productive and like helpful for society. That's been one of the really hard things for me because not only have we been getting criticized for failing the public and not learning how to solve autism, we were wasting money on diversity projects and that we were not working to the best of our abilities. And it's so wrong. Like I remember at some of our meetings, our director always used the same slide, but it was like, this is not monopoly money. Like this is taxpayer dollars and we need to be responsible, and it is vitally important that we think about everything we're doing, right? That's kind of one of the reasons that I wanted to be involved in this project, just kind of fight some of the misinformation I think has been shared about the work that we do.
I'm Anna. I was probationary employee from the National Institutes of Health as well. Everybody was like, you're fine, our job is congressionally mandated, which I think everybody in some way job is congressionally mandated, because I heard that from so many people who got riffed or who got fired. I feel like probationary people, but just I was kind of assured the Wednesday before that I was going to be fine. And then Thursday, because I was new, I'd started on December 2nd. Thursday, I was doing my security clearance. So like I had to do a security clearance interview. And so I did that for like 4 hours, get like a public trust clearance. And then Friday, my supervisor, there were like the rumors going around. And so I was supposed to go out of town, but I decided to stay home. My supervisor was like, there is a list. I don't know if you're on it. And then a couple hours later was like, I'm so sorry, like you're on this list. It was really hard. I had been unemployed before starting in December for like 7 months. And so I just was like, I don't know if I can apply to jobs. Like because I'd been applying to jobs for so long. I just like was not in a place to do that. I was really new. I was a contractor at NIH before this in a completely different role. So I worked in peer review, and I thought that the work I did was really important. I was like excited to do that for a couple of years, try to go get a PhD, and then come back and work at NIH, probably in like translational sciences, because I'm really interested in with rare disease research, different areas. But instead, I was fired, and so I made a website called Spoon Federal, actually, which is just like a website for a bunch of resources for people who were in a similar situation as me. Like the weekend I lost my job because I'm can be kind of an intense person in that way, that I just really want to help people. When there were rumors that there were going to be these rifts, I had kind of learned from the website other people I'd connected to some of the ways that you can, as a community of an agency, combat some of the things, and ways to, how to support one another, things that people who are being rifted might need. And so when the rifts happened at NIH, with a couple others, started 27 United. We worked together to offer these resources to NIH employees, and then started to do advocacy, as well.
I wanted to build on one thing really quick. The NIH United resource was so helpful for me because when I was fired, I didn't get any information. Like, I got nothing from HR. I got that email that was 5 sentences long saying that I was a terrible employee, and that was it. I tried to reach my HR, I tried to reach my supervisor, my colleagues. Like, no one had anything. Like, I didn't even know like how long I would have health insurance for. And like, it was just terrible. And then another colleague told me about NIH United, and that's how I got involved. And it was just like, oh, like, they have information and they know how to get information to us. So I feel like you guys like really stepped up, because I couldn't get anything officially. I think maybe in July, I got an informational letter about how my health insurance would last 30 days after being fired. So it was already done by then.
All right. So I was not NIH. It's my name. I'm going by Greenbrier for this. I worked in the National Wildlife Refuge System, which is under the Department of Interior in the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So Department of Interior, Fish and Wildlife Service, National Wildlife Refuge System. People like to confuse us with parks, and I'm like, we're best friends, please. We had some discussions about like what the change in administration would look like for National Wildlife Refuges. A lot of my colleagues and I were worried about possible rifts, and our leadership was pretty much just like, oh, don't really worry about it. Public lands are bipartisan. And this is something that has been looked at before in terms of merging all of the land owning agencies and just making one big land agency. And apparently it's never gone through before. None of the 573 refuges are fully staffed, like 0% of them are fully staffed. So it was like, it's highly unlikely that we would be rift, because who would they rift? We already don't have a full staff. So we were worried about it, but not too worried, I suppose, especially since my coworker and I were almost permanent. We were getting close to it. We were hired as permanent employees. I was hired through the Directorate Fellowship Program. I had direct hire authority from that. I worked with tribal nations on that project. So that for me was like, okay, I made it. I'm in federal work. This is something I've been wanting to do for a long time. Public service with Fish and Wildlife was like the most amazing thing I ever wanted to do. And park ranger at that. Park ranger was just such a fun job, working to educate kids, adults, the general public, visitors to Florida who've never seen wildlife there, and protecting manatees was a really unique, very fun experience. And February 14th, or I guess the 13th, I know I have a very similar timeline to you all at NIH. We were seeing some news stories about probationary employees being fired without cause. And I talked to my coworkers and we're like, oh, that's odd. That's right. They did get a whole list of all of us probationary employees. That was concerning, but everyone around me, especially people who, volunteers and my family members, were like, oh, don't worry about it. It's probably nothing. And then February 14th, I had gotten everything together, all of my personnel documents, just in case. And then I got an email saying, invited to a meeting called Update for Probationary Employees. So we kind of had a heads up, except there was no notes about it. No, what's this information going to be about? It was just an update. And two of my coworkers did not get that email, but I did. My supervisor did. And my coworker who was out that day, she had gotten that email. We came to find out later on when she came into the office after the meeting. We all just kind of looked at each other and went, oh, that's not, we probably know what that is. So I went and sat on a dock, tried not to cry. And then my supervisor came out, sat with me. That made me cry. And he just goes, never seen this before. This is the worst day of my career. And I'm like, I hope it's the worst day of mine too, buddy. It was not a great day. So that meeting, I think I have some quotes. They started it a few minutes late. The initial vibe was very vague, saying there is nothing that you have done wrong. We hired you because you were the best people for the job, because we wanted and we needed you, because you embody the things that we think are important in the Fish and Wildlife Service, a respectful, collaborative, forward-thinking approach to the way we advance our conservation mission. But what we are about to discuss does not reflect the value that we saw in you and that we continue to see in you. And then, of course, it came down to, we were not aware of this until late yesterday, but we have been notified by the Office of Personnel Management that we need to release our probationary and accepted service trial period employees effective end of day today. That was how I found out. My coworkers and I helped my other coworker get all of her personnel information off of EOPF before it went goodbye forever. And I got an email after we left for the day saying, could you take this survey to tell us why you left the service? Which is kind of rude. And I didn't leave the service on purpose at that time. So that was kind of insulting. And then later on, we got a package with all of our paper documents and our last our last paycheck. And that was just sort of a package that had been poorly taped shut and left on our front porch. There was no signing for it, and it had like multiple instances of our social security number on it. That was also kind of rushed, in my opinion. So yeah, that was unfortunate. That was the timeline. And March, I think similar to NIH, some people, there was something that had changed and we were able to be reinstated. I had no paperwork of that. All I had was a phone call from my supervisor saying, hey, you can come back. And I went and got my new PIV card to access all of the things that I needed to access. Never got anything in writing, just one thing that said you are entitled to back pay because of whatever statute. Nothing that said that I was ever reinstated. So that was disappointing, but I was there for just a little while longer. The stress was enough for me.
I had a similar experience to Greenbrier because I was also in the Department of Interior, but I worked for the National Park Service as a tribal liaison. So my work was also federally mandated because the Park Service is legally required to consult with tribal nations on any federal undertakings happening at parks. For me, I woke up on Valentine's Day and saw the mass firings of the Forest Service employees and immediately assumed it would happen to me that same day too. But I still went to work, and I actually met with a few tribal nations associated with the park I worked at that day. I had consultation that very day. And I actually was informed from a friend from Fish and Wildlife Service. They were told what Greenbrier was told. And it was because of that that I kind of knew something was going to happen at the Park Service. And I remember asking my supervisor if she had heard anything, and she had not. She went to the superintendent and came back and said, we hadn't heard anything, and surely they won't get rid of you because your position is important. And like every one of you all said, that's just crazy. There's no way this will happen. But unfortunately it did. And for me, I did not get my termination letter until about 5:40 that night. So I had logged out that day and I thought, okay, I'm safe. Like everyone else in the Park Service I knew that had got the letter had already gotten it. I'm good. So I went out to dinner with my family and took my government phone with me just in case and got the email out at dinner, which was really hard because I was there with my daughter. So it was hard, like trying to put on that face of, okay, I can't cry in public and I still have to be a mom right now. And then going home and trying to understand what happened. I actually, because of my job and the fact that I would send consultation letters out to tribal nations, I got special approval to come back to work on Monday to be able to notify all 24, 25 tribal nations that I work with that I would no longer be the point of contact for my park. and that they would have to email my supervisor going forward. And since I was a remote worker, I also had to spend those 2 hours that they paid me for, which it actually took me half a day to send out emails and to also leave a list to my supervisor about everything that I had sent out recently and all of the conversations with the tribes that I'd been having. I had to write up a whole document for her to have that information going forward for consultation that she would be picking up. And then I had to mail out all of my equipment that day too. That was extremely hard. And then, just like Greenbrier, I got the notification in March that we were being reinstated. I did not get a formal letter from DOI or from the National Park Service for that reinstatement. I got an email from my supervisor telling me. And at first it was really confusing because they told me I would be reinstated on at administrative leave. And then the next day I was told, actually, no, you have to start back immediately. So they had changed due to, I think it was Judge Alsop's ruling. DOI didn't comply with it at first. And then they got in trouble, and then they sent out a different email the next day. And it was in that moment that I declined reinstatement because it wasn't safe for me to go back since my position was funded from Inflation Reduction Act money, which had already been pulled earlier in January. They had already taken that money away from me, and then they had given it back. And so I assumed with that happening, I might lose that money again, which the Park Service did lose that money. I have friends who were funded by that who also lost their funding, and some of them have had to leave, or their parks are funding them out of base funds. So I decided not to do it for that reason, and because I was a term employee and I had no hope that my term would be renewed towards the end of this administration. I think we all went through something similar, but it was also different at different agencies because I know not all of us were reinstated, and it still hurt the same for each of us because we were all starting out in this amazing career that we had all dreamed and hoped for. And it was unfair that it was cut short in the way that it was, and that we were told that we weren't good enough employees in the way that they told us. And I imagine that pain and just how it felt to lose your jobs is kind of what inspired this survey. Can someone talk about that and talk about where did the idea for the survey come from?
Sometime in November of 2025, there was an NIH chat that I joined pretty quickly after that week, after February 14th. And it was just a place for us to vent, a place for us to share resources, a place for us to be like, what does this legal term mean? Or, what are our options? I wasn't very active on it, especially by November, but Anna messaged, and Anna was like, hey, the 1-year anniversary of our probationary firing is coming up. Should we do something? Or does anyone have anything going on? And for a long time, I had been thinking, the news doesn't talk about us correctly. If they mention us at all, they have the probationary story wrong. And they always talk about the rifts, like the April 1st rifts, which were also terrible. I had friends at NIOSH that they all lost their jobs. The April 1st rifts were terrible as well. But it's almost like the probationary employees. We were the first to get hit a month after the administration started, and then we were just forgotten, thousands of us. And there was very little information, and then people were saying that we were doing fine, and I was like, I'm not fine. I think other people aren't fine. And so when Anna mentioned that, I just was like, is anyone doing a survey to see how we're doing, how we're actually doing? And we didn't hear about it. And initially I just thought maybe 10, 15 questions, see how it is, maybe just within NIH, within the group. But then after a while, I was like, no, I want to know how other people are doing. I want to know how agencies across the country are doing, because these probationary firings hit every single state in our nation and hit almost every single agency. I think that's where it started. And then Anna took and ran with it. And I'll let Anna speak, but Anna was able to get people from all these other agencies. And then I don't know how Greenbrier joined, but then when Greenbrier joined, I had literally just drafted like just a couple of questions, and then Greenbrier took it and again ran with it and added questions and all this stuff. And so, yeah, I'll let you guys jump in there. But that's kind of where this survey came about.
Greenbrier, can you actually discuss? I know you did a lot of work with developing the questions. Like you did a lot of work. Can you talk about not just the community effort of everyone who designed the survey? Because I know a lot of us in the group helped out, but also your specific role and just overall what all went into designing and structuring the questions. How did you account for the different experiences across agencies in those questions?
So for the survey, the questions, I think what it came down to was just, well, I'm part of a group chat that was called Fired Probie's DOI. So it was DOI wide, all the people who had been illegally terminated from Department of Interior. It was just something that at the forefront of my mind is that not everyone had the same experience. So in coming up with these questions, it was like, okay, how do we encapsulate as many possible experiences as we can without also including leading questions like, did you hate what happened to you? Like it was, that's kind of, those things we want to look at. And I had done some media interviews and things. So I don't have any formal training in media, but I think over the years, I've just been able to pick up on certain things, making sure that I choose my words carefully. So I had my master's research actually was survey based. So I had already some idea of it, even though I'd never done it as like a job, although technically my master's was a job. Just adding those questions, and then more questions were coming up in my mind as I was adding questions, and then adding these while we had a meeting. And some people started to add questions at the same time, and I'm like, ooh, that's a good idea. Oh, that's a good idea. Or those are good answers to have and include. And that's a great way to put whatever I was trying to say poorly. And just people coming together and adding more and more to it and asking, why don't we have this as an option for an answer? And trying to encapsulate all those experiences was a real challenge, but I think that combined effort was really the most important part, and a key part of the survey is our combined efforts, our combined experiences to know what people experienced during these illegal mass terminations. I think it was a great effort on everyone's part, but we were able to pull it together, wordsmith it nicely so we're not asking leading questions, and I think we got pretty much everyone's experience. Not everybody will have been reflected in these results, but I think a vast majority of people were represented.
I just compliment that when we had one of the people reviewing a couple of people reviewed the survey, and one person commented, I like that these questions were very neutral sounding. I was like, good job. Way to go.
Anna, you did a lot of work finding people from various agencies to help design the survey and then to also share it widely after the survey went live. What was it like trying to find people? And did you notice a common thread of fear to talk or to want to help from people?
I think that, we're all in this moment in time when people are really scared. I think a lot of the way that I did things was trying to connect with people I knew. So like 27 United, we developed relationships with people from across the internet who were resistance rangers and different agency groups already. I really tried to use these trusted spaces to develop relationships. I took a lot of time and put a lot of energy into trying to connect with a lot of different people because that was my task. And I had a lot of connections with 27 United. We've been working with the National Public Health Coalition, which is a bunch of former CDC people. They used to be fired but fighting on a couple other things at the time. We'd work with them a lot. And I was in a number of chats that were not just NIH specific. So I was in trusted chats that had people from different agencies, and I knew some people from different agencies, and I knew some people who knew people from other agencies that I didn't know anyone from. So I tried to look at the different agencies that I thought were impacted by the probationary survey and would reach out to people and say, do you know someone from this agency? We really are looking for like one point of contact if they have a stat, or even if they don't, just to have one person to connect with and see if they want to give input on this survey. And so when we're disseminating it, so all of the leading up to the survey development was kind of done not behind closed doors, but just by word of mouth, really. Like, or people we each knew, but it was trying to work within the networks and relationships that we had. And then when the survey went live and we were, trying to get people to fill it out, because 27 United, like, I made relationships also with alumni networks and like with the Partnership for Public Service. And so I reached out to a lot of different organizations I knew. I reached out to kind of just put it on our social media. We worked with other like Resistance Rangers and other government kind of adjacent organizations to get the information out there. I put it on all of our social medias, my personal social media, like just really tried to cast a really wide net with the survey and the link. But yeah, most of it and the connection was really through personal relationships. A lot of the work was just trying to find a couple points of contact from each agency and making sure that it felt like it was really represented there, because we're also scared in this moment in time.
This question is for anyone that wants to answer it. What is the most striking trend or theme from the survey results that you've noticed?
As someone who applied to over 150 jobs at this point, it was the really, really sad, I think, trend where we saw people applying to over 100 jobs, getting...
No one had more than 9 interviews.
And then having like maybe one job offer, and that was it. Out of all of that effort, all of that interview time, it just, most people are either only had one job offer out of all of it or are still unemployed. There are some people, significant portion, that are still unemployed at this point.
21% of us are still, of the respondents are still unemployed a year later.
We had asked people to fill out what they felt like America was losing out on as a result of losing their job. And a couple of us had access to the results as they were coming in. And so I would just, before bed, like look and see how many people had responded and just read like what the impact was on America. And it was just really, really like, it spans all of these sectors. It kind of looks at all of the areas that we live in. And it's like, government is so silent. So like everything that we do involves the government, like our water, our air, everything. And it was really enlightening and really sad to read through how all the things that touch our day-to-day lives are impacted by all of the cuts that were experienced.
For me, it was seeing how much of an impact this had on people, because I think a lot of times the general public doesn't understand, like, oh, like you lost your job, like people lose their job every day, but like it wasn't that we lost our jobs or we were fired illegally. It felt like the court systems weren't supporting us. I mean, we have that ruling from ALSUP saying that we've all moved on already and people don't even want to go back to whatever they were doing when they were removed from their jobs. So seeing the results where people are talking about like facing new diagnoses of depression, having to do new medications, getting second mortgages on their homes, like just it really had a huge impact just on people's life and like their livelihood. And I think that it's because like there was this idea that you were in something that was like bigger than yourself. Like you weren't just doing a job for a salary, you were doing a job because it was something you cared about and you had dedicated years in education and experience and like you were really passionate about it. So I think that's probably also one of the reasons that it like had such a giant effect.
And actually, one point that's positive, I added this question and I'm glad we kept it in, but I asked who volunteered during this time at post termination, and over half of the respondents volunteered in their community. And I think that just goes to show how dedicated federal workers are. Like we went into civilian civil service because we are dedicated to the US, we are dedicated to our country, we're dedicated to our communities. And so just because we were fired, and like I'm sure a lot of the people who volunteered had those symptoms of depression and anxiety and trauma responses, but through it all they were still volunteering in their communities. And I just think it goes to show the quality of employees that were lost in that mass termination of the probationary workers.
Recently, OPM proposed a new rule within their reduction in force regulations that argues that probationary employees should be excluded from reduction in force or RIF procedures because it's administratively burdensome to include them. This new rule essentially says that because probies don't have a rating of record yet, it's fair to exclude them from RIF procedure. It specifically states there is no need to require agencies to undergo more cumbersome procedures to terminate employees, referring to Probie employees, whose appointments to the competitive service have not been finalized, and whom agencies must evaluate to determine whether their permanent employment would advance the public interest. I know when I read this rule, it made me angry because it made me feel like they were looking for a reason to legally in the future be able to do what they did to us, to do it to more Probie employees again. How does this make you all feel, particularly since you've read the survey results? You know how it's impacted so many people.
Part of it is just not based on fact because I had already had a performance review and I had gotten awards for my work while I was there. So I'm like, well, you already have evaluated me. Like I don't know where they're coming from with this idea that they don't know if our jobs are useful. I think also like federal jobs have so much, or at least they used to, like there was so much that went into them. Like the interviewing process was very intense, the vetting process, like I remember having to get fingerprinted, passing background checks. Like there's a lot that goes into these jobs. So they don't just randomly make postings if they're not needed. They need to be approved. So I guess when I was reading that, I was just like, I don't know. This is just not based in fact. Like I don't even know like where this is coming from. So it did make me very angry and really confused.
So as somebody who I heard about the position in February of 2024, I knew my job posting was coming up, and it took until November of 2024 to get hired because even though I knew the people, it wasn't an easy thing. I had to get through USA Jobs, which is impossible to get through, and I've heard it's now even harder. You have to answer all those questions correctly. You have to get through their hiring procedure that has nothing to do with the specific group that you're applying for. And then you have to go through multiple rounds of job interviews with the leadership at your institute or in your branch. And so it's not an easy procedure. And Briar, you can speak how difficult it is for DOI.
It's the same here. I mean, like I said, the refuges, not a single one is fully staffed. So every single posting is hard fought for. Every single one, every single hiring is done because it is in desperate need of an employee in that role. And most of us have already had some sort of performance evaluation. I had a performance evaluation. I had monetary and time off awards for excellent service. And it's things like that where it's just, we are already being assessed. People don't get converted to permanent or competitive status until they have like the supervisor approval saying, yes, this person should be promoted onto that service. So already there is a way to fire probationary employees who are underperforming or who are not a right fit for the job. That is already in place. So to me, this rule just says, like you said, it is administratively burdensome. They are only putting this in writing because they don't want to do the paperwork. It is not because there is a widespread issue with probationary employees underperforming or just being bad at their job or not being in the public interest. It is because the paperwork is too much and it's easier to just fire people wholesale because they want to.
Your goal is to share this data on the website. Can you tell the listeners a bit more about the website and how you plan to share the data?
A disclaimer is I don't have a ton of information about the website yet, but we're working on that. But for the data itself, as you can hear from this podcast, like we have really good findings. We had people who spent a ton of time developing the survey, making sure we had like really thoughtful questions that cover many, many topics. And then when we got their responses, I was really impressed because you could tell that people like just answered honestly, put a lot of time into their into their answers. And they also shared some things that were very personal and also, I think, very vital to understanding where we all are as a group about a year later. So I'm developing some dashboards to share the information in aggregate because we want to make sure that we keep everything anonymous and we don't make it able to identify any of our individual respondents. So the ideal plan is that we'll have kind of an overview. So you'll start off with an overview so you know how many people took the survey, what are the main agencies that were represented, are people employed currently, and then getting into some other pages where you'll be able to kind of like flip through with interactive dashboards and see some of the answers to the like more personal questions kind of regarding health, finances, just like what the respondents kind of thoughts are, I guess. Some of the other pages hopefully to show the work that respondents had been doing before they were fired, and then also illustrating the losses, like from these firings, like what is the public losing? And ideally with the dashboard, it'll make it a little bit more interactive because we do have some really nice, just like static graphs that Momo was making that I think we can use in social media and use on some of the web pages and handouts and things. So hopefully the dashboard is a way to kind of like incorporate that same information, but be more interactive so that hopefully users can like go through themselves and feel engaged.
And now you'll hear from Momo with the survey results.
So there are no exact numbers, but it's estimated that about 25,000 probationary federal employees, or probies, were fired in February 2025. We didn't expect thousands of responses. We only expected about 100 or so. So we were pleasantly surprised when we got over 300 responses. After we did some data cleaning, we ended up with just a little over 300 who were defined correctly as probationary employees and were impacted in the February 2025 illegal terminations. Respondents to the survey ranged from all across the federal government, including, the Department of Agriculture, Commerce, Defense, Energy, Health and Human Services, Homeland Security, Housing and Urban Development, Interior, Transportation, Treasury, and Veteran Affairs, along with the ones that are kind of outside of those large agencies but are still under the executive branch, which is such as like the Environmental Protection Agency, the General Service Administration, the USAID, and the U.S. Trade and Development Agency. We also have respondents from nearly every single state, which was really surprising. We're just missing kind of a handful of them. About 44% of the respondents are formerly contractors for the federal government, which means they worked for the agency but not as a full-time federal employee or an FTE. And over 90% of these contractors had been there for over a year, with about 19% of those former contractors having been in their role for over 11 years. So even though they weren't, officially defined as a probationary employee because they had just started their full-time position, they had been with their agency or in doing similar work for at least a year, and for some of them for several years. So that's a lot of lost institutional knowledge. Each agency dealt with their probies differently. Some, like HHS, where I was, placed us on administrative leave until like mid-March, and then they said that we would be terminated after that date. Others, like DOI, terminated effective as of February 14th, from my understanding. Similarly, the agencies all reacted differently to various court orders. So about 25% of the respondents were reinstated right away. I don't know if you remember that story of all those like nuclear safety scientists that were tracked down that following Monday because they realized that they were necessary, that their jobs were critical. About 15% of the respondents are reinstated and then terminated at a later date. And about 45% were placed on administrative leave, or their administrative leave was extended and they were terminated later. And then we had a handful of others that were other special scenarios. And so like myself at HHS, we were placed on administrative leave until mid-March. There was a court order that extended that administrative leave until May, and then that's when we were terminated. But this kind of just shows how chaotic this time period was. Each agency was handling things differently. And kind of like what Greenbrier said, it was really hard to cover all the possible answers because it was just so difficult and messy. And so the agencies had very little direction from OPM. They were just kind of given these orders and then kind of ran with it. And then there were all these other challenges in the courts. About just under half, about 46% of the respondents were unemployed for 6 months or more. And as of January 31st, 2026, 21% of our survey respondents were unemployed after losing that federal probationary position in February. We had about 72% that had full-time employment, which we defined as 30 plus hours per week, and about 7% reported being employed part-time. And I know there's been talk that the Probies were doing better and making more money in the private sector. But our survey showed that only about 14% of the respondents were making significantly more or more than they were before, while 48% were making less or significantly less, and about 8% reported making the same as in their federal role. The respondents also faced serious financial hardships during this time. About 13% took out a loan to help during this time. Another 22% considered taking out a loan but found other options, and about 4% tried to take out a loan but were denied. Similarly, about 15% of the respondents took money out of a retirement account, while 23% considered it but found other options. And again, about the same amount, 4% tried to withdraw from a retirement account, but they weren't able to. About 22% of respondents had to move after their unlawful termination. Another 28% considered moving but found another way to stay in their home. And there was a much smaller number, about 4%, who owned their home, which was only about 40-some% of our respondents. Of the 4% of them had to refinance their home, and then 2% of them lost their home because of their unlawful termination. Another point that hit me was the responses to our mental health questions. Several of the respondents reported symptoms of anxiety, depression, and trauma response. There were also about a quarter of our respondents who reported having to start a new medication like an SSRI to cope with the unlawful terminations. I do want to say at this time that I want to thank all the people who took the survey and were so honest. Some of those answers, and I read every answer, it was just so heartbreaking because I know I was going through a hard time, but to hear and to read other people's, comments and their stories, I know it was really hard. And for those of you who filled it out, I thank you so much. And I see you and I hear you and we are with you. And I'm so thankful that you are helping by doing this and getting our story out there. So thank you. When we were first designing this survey, I did reach out to somebody one of the reporters or podcaster that I had been speaking to, and he wanted to know about the brain drain in the federal government. So we asked people if they would be willing to come back. We asked the question several different ways, including, would you take the role that you were terminated from if it was offered to you? And we asked various questions similar to this, but in different scenarios. But similarly, it wasn't exact, but about the same percentages are true for all those questions. We had for that question about getting your former role back, 12% said no, they wouldn't. 42% said they would. And then 45% said that it would depend. And when we asked people to elaborate, they answered it would depend. Most people said that they would return if there was a change in administration. They would need some assurance of stability. They would need the protections for this federal civil service. They wanted the ability to telework again, among several other reasons. We did ask questions about their education levels, and over about 80% of our respondents held a master's degree or higher, and about a quarter of our respondents held a dual degree, like an MD PhD or MPH PhD. So I think this shows just a serious brain drain in the federal workforce. One thing I'd like to point out is that we didn't collect basic demographic information such as age ranges, gender identity, racial, ethnic makeup of our respondents. One of the reasons is that we know a lot of people were scared during this time, and we didn't want to make things identifiable. But if I had to do it again, I think I would add those questions, and I would, just because I wanted to see who was most impacted. I think across the 25,000, everybody was impacted because they just took such a general swipe. But I do wish we had collected that. We do still have this survey open, so we never closed it, and we are thinking that we will continue to collect data, continue to collect stories from people who want to share. This is different from the RIFs because the probationary firings were the first. They were so swift and they were so cruel, I want to say. I mean, I know the RIFs were very cruel too, but it caught everybody off guard. And then after they fired us, the probies, I think the rest of the federal workforce was a little bit more braced about what could happen with RIFs. And so we do want to continue collecting the stories. And so we will be kind of amending the survey and keeping it open for anyone else who wants to share and for people who want to maybe retake it after we make the changes. But that information will be forthcoming, and then we'll update the information on the 27 United website.
The data we've discussed today isn't just about spreadsheets or numbers. It's about the people who show up every day to keep our public institutions running. When the administration and DOJ tried to rewrite the narrative of our work as poor performance, they ignored the actual evidence of our dedication. What Momo, Anna, Greenbrier, and Krista, and all the other probies who helped with this survey have built with this survey is a way for us to finally speak for ourselves. It provides a look at the reality of the 2025 purges that you won't find in an official memo. If you were one of the probies caught in that wave, I hope this conversation reminds you that you aren't alone, and you aren't alone in how you're feeling. Your career and your contributions matter, even if the system tried to tell you otherwise. To our guest, thank you for collecting this data and for making sure our experiences are documented. To our listeners, you can view the full visualizations and the human cost report at our website and on the Fired Probie Survey website, which we've linked in the show notes. Thank you for being here. Until next time, keep resisting. Because resisting is how we make sure our truth isn't just a memory, but a matter of record.
You're listening to Resistance Rangers on the Air. This podcast is produced by Resistance Rangers, a grassroots volunteer collective. The views expressed here are those of the host and guests who may or may not be current employees, speaking solely in their personal capacities. For any hosts and guests who may or may not be current employees, this is not a part of any official duties. We are not affiliated with the National Park Service, the Department of the Interior, or any other government agency. Nothing said on this podcast should be interpreted as official policy, guidance, or endorsement.